long. We're going to give our presenter Kenneth around 40 minutes to take us through what they have as national housing and the housing sector in general, Ugandan housing sector. And of course, what they have to offer, especially what they can offer to us, his OBs. After that, we shall open up the floor into a question and answer session. That will be around 7 for like 20 minutes. And then we shall close the session. Normally our prayer comes at the end, not at the beginning. Special recognition to those who have always attended our sessions from day one, those who have never missed. I know them, that's the good thing with it. Special recognition for those who are attending for the first time. And of course, special recognition for the members of the NTARE Schools All Boys Association. And lastly, special recognition for non-OBs of NTARE School. Today, I don't seem to see our ladies logged in, but once I see ladies log in, you know I won't miss that opportunity of introducing them. My chairman, Apollo, indicated that the numbers seem to be going down. That one, I'll disagree with him. I'll agree that we need to do to do an analysis and measure where we can do better and where we think. We started at around 40 something. Last session, one of the sessions we clocked 94, and I know today's will be exceptional. Bruce, I hope you're recording because Kenneth is beginning now. Thank you. Over to you, Kenneth.
Thank you, Chair Dixon. Thank you all who are logged in. It's a pleasure. It's an opportunity to be on this platform and to appreciate the services that are being rendered, not only to the NSOBA fraternity, but also to the wider Ugandan community and the world at large. I also want to appreciate that the discussions are indeed very, very, very insightful. And as coined the Chiganiro, indeed it brings together the discussions that should be on the table, and particularly for the development of our country. So I'm happy to be on this platform. You'll allow me to try and do the sharing of my discussion this afternoon. I hope we all can be able to see that shared screen.
Yes, we can see. Thank you.
Yes, the preambles have been given. Indeed, I'm the Chief Executive Officer at National Housing, but also importantly, I'm a key player in the real estate, the housing sector. And I appreciate that indeed I was an old boy for 6 years, 88 to 93. I held various portfolios, right from senior to senior 3, science club, debating club. We brought a lot of trophies. And S5, S6, yes, I was the deputy head prefect at a time when Kedega Danfred was the head prefect. Myself, I think Dr. Simwe, Stephen, and others who were such a team that we did our part, and we appreciate that this continues to happen. And indeed, for the 6 years, I was also in Newhouse, so it's important to observe that. I want to, on the forward that I work with National Housing, just on one page, be able to tell you what we've done in our footprint to date. But to mention that we are the leading real estate developer for the 57 years, having been incorporated in 1964. However, under the PAD Act 2002, were divested as a limited liability company to go out and do business. But I'm about to mention that within the real estate and the housing sector, all planned and organized neighborhoods in the country, wherever you move, in towns, in municipalities, you look at all those bomber grounds, you come to Kampala, the Bugorobi, Nakasero, Rubowa, and Tinda, wherever you've seen prime locations, that has been footprint handwork of national housing. So we lead the way and others have been following. I should also mention to the fraternity that we have in-house capacity for designs, supervision, documentation, but indeed we are constituted with a group of professionals, architects, engineers, quantity surveyors. We have legal chambers. So I raise this as an opportunity, one, for employment to many of you who are in this sector or interested in doing business in this area, but also that we have a lot we can do together, even if you are not right full-time with us. We have plant and machinery equipment, which we lease, which we hire for doing our own works, but also when we have less of those works, we are able to lease them to you. So it's an opportunity to you and to the entire fraternity. We have commercial spaces, and as we'll be seeing in the housing sector, Crescent Towers building, I want to invite you if you need space. Under my hand and signature is very limited space, but you are able to book yourself space. We have warehouses at industrial area 7th Street, and we are moving to develop more. Should this be an area of your interest and opportunity, both in growing that sector, that area of development, but also if you need space. I should highlight onset that we undertake collaborative frameworks, either under the PPP framework or joint ventures. And so this is largely seen in people who may have land, because land is such a resource if you're going to be dealing in real estate and housing. But I should also mention, because collaboration is not only in land, we are extending it to those who manufacture materials, because we see a lot of material lying idle in hardware shops. And our thought process going forward, if we are to redeem the housing sector, is to let those hardware materials be kept on sites, because the manufacturers already will have put in money than waiting in the shops. They wait with the product that is on sale. I should also add that we have available properties on sale. Those of you are in Mbarara, if you go to Boma Grounds, the Louisville apartments are on sale, 3 and 2 bedroom units. Impala Estate is in Namungona, Jasmine Apartments in Naria. We're also rolling out close to about 400 units at Naria Pride. Maybe in the next 1 month, you'll be seeing activities running. This is an area as you approach Quality's supermarket on Namgongo Road. And many others countrywide where we are opening these opportunities. However, members, housing, where I'm assigned to do analysis of the housing sector in Uganda, to talk about housing, it is the cradle, and it presents itself in 4 main subsectors. One of them is the commercial subsector, where you have shops, people who are crying in town with arcades, the office premises, the malls, transit terminals, tourism, etc. In that area, you have a lot of housing business, and we see it happening. What I know is that, yes, people have known national housing, and probably for this discussion, many of you would be interested in the residential subsector of housing and real estate. So you'll be looking at low, medium, and high-end accommodation, and you're looking at estates and residential houses. We also have, of course, institutional housing, which is institutional real estate. You're talking about schools, hospitals, barracks, prisons, sports, stadia, etc. This is a set of real estate or housing where you can do business. One, just as a developer, not necessarily, for instance, if it is a school, you put up the housing infrastructure, and then other people come to lease it from you and they do the school business. Similarly, it happens for hospitals. It happens for all other institutions. That's institutional real estate. And many times, not many of us look at that. Last but not least is the industrial real estate housing. It is true that prior to any industrial production, any process, even in the 4 subsectors of housing, you'll first put up an housing infrastructure. For you to do production of steel products, you need initially to have that housing, the warehousing that is the domain of housing. So at the center of every process, every activity in human life cycle is going to be housing. And that's how central it is, that if we're going to be looking at the housing sector in this country, we give it that broader perspective. And I will not be going into details because this is a huge sector that needs quite an ample time. But for today, I'll pick highlighters, create the discussion, get the ball rolling to make sure that we can engage effectively to see how we can realign our housing sector. Colleagues, I've talked about the human life cycle rotates around housing. When you look at that chart, in number 1, when you're born, gone are the days when people are born in gardens and under trees. We must look at our health infrastructure as a starting point. Soon after, when you're growing, you run to schools, like I've mentioned. Those are institutional housing infrastructure. In between, probably when you go to places of worship, churches, mosques, you're looking at housing. To date, all of you employed, you're in office buildings. If you want to go into manufacture, to make sure you have value addition and creation industrial. But importantly, the last I want to highlight is that in death, for tombs we see created now or built, that is a set of housing that eats up space, that constrains sale of properties, that is so sensitive that it's hard to move, that we've not paid attention. However, in that cycle, as you run around it, central to it will be the residential housing. And that's why most people are so passionate about the residential, because every time you come from hospital, you run back home. From school, you run back home. From church, you run back home. It's only one way. If you look at those arrows, it's only when you move from the residence to the tomb and you don't come back. So it's critical that we pay attention to all these life cycle housing needs. I mentioned I'll be addressing both housing and real estate intermittently because both speak to one and the same. But for you to do housing, but more so real estate, it means that you're going to be dealing with land and immovable development on it. This is a very, very, very strong statement. And we see it in real life, that for you to be seen to own a plot of land, until you develop it, you probably, even if you have a title, you may not be necessarily an owner. But the immovable developments on land, why particularly they are largely housing, is that roads can move, water lines can move, power lines can move. But once you have invested in housing on land, then you are into the bracket called real estate and housing. So of course, it also could be property consisting of land and the buildings on it. So it is pertinent that as we look at real estate, we also, we relatedly be looking at housing. I want to mention it is capital intensive. Those of you who are doing this business, right from start to end, the entire cycle of realizing housing is highly capital intensive. It is also important to note, last weekend, the discussion highlighted this, that the return is long-term. I'll tell you at National Housing, we've seen when we put up estates, our sales cycle is 3 to 5, 6, 7 years. But real estate, if you've gotten into it as a business, you should be ready to look at returning your money 5 years plus. It could even go as high as 30 years. It's important, colleagues, that as we look at housing, we've already seen that it is land and buildings on them. other on land. We also know that land exists naturally, it's inelastic. You can't expand it. Once you've misused it, you can't recover it. And for Uganda's case, you all know that it's about 240 square kilometers. And for you to acquire this land, you acquire it as a capital item. In your financing plan, you must have sufficient funds to make sure you acquire that land. It is affected by the tenure systems. This could be another subject altogether, whether it's mile or freehold or name it. What is critical for colleagues to understand that when we do buildings, housing, real estate, it is such a value chain, value creation, value addition that we undertake. All buildings will rely on materials that are coming from underground. For us to create buildings, all the buildings you see standing above ground literally have come from materials that have been underground. So we are creating a tilt of natural balance. And so you've got to think seriously, because the value addition is when you mine sand, mix it with cement, or if you're going to manufacture cement, you have mined clay. If you're going to deal with steel, you have processed it from minerals. All these come from underground. So we create a permanent feature. If we are looking at housing for the future that is sustainable, housing should be looking at about 200 years plus. This has happened in developed countries, in Europe, in the US. And that's when, even when we talk about a return on the investment 30 years, that's even too early. Some of these properties, if you're serious, would return at year 50 or 100. I want to highlight that the sources of capital to do housing, and this is in generic terms, whether as a private or government, largely is debt financing, because being capital intensive, you're looking at loans. We should be looking at savings and the retirement packages, funds that are kept in pension funds, kept in NSSF, because they are long-term. You save when you start working at 25, you get it at 60. Over the time horizon within which that return should happen, if those funds were allowed to benefit you through a development called housing or real estate, I think it would be very, very, very beneficial to the savers. We also know we have the mortgage financing. This is through the banks, and we'll be discussing those interest rates and whether it's the favorable form of capital to do real estate. But also we know we have circles and other forms of funding. Chair and members, I would interest you, given the big membership of NSOBA, that we could actually begin to look at realizing resources that can help us to do housing. I want to mention the biggest cost driver in realizing housing will largely be technology and the design. Of course, the design will have picked the technology, leave alone the financing costs and other aspects. But this calls for professionalism. So as NSOBA fraternity, those of you are in the design side, the professional side, earlier I mentioned, we have an opportunity to see how we can bring these costs down to make the products affordable. Delivery mechanism is incremental. For Uganda's case, you'll find that more than 80% of the developers build their houses over years and want to find everything wrong. If you start building a house at 25 and you occupy it at 40, you've lost time and you've not gained benefits from that property. And yet it is going to live probably 100 years way after you. Of course, contracting, we're also looking at condominium developments. We also are seeing joint ventures. And as national housing, we've been largely doing turnkey projects over time.
Someone is editing our presentation.
I don't know who is doing that.
I can see the name, but I don't want to mention it. But let's proceed.
Yeah, for Uganda's case, as NSOBA, we have a role to play in making sure we redirect the development, the housing agenda, particularly that it features largely in our initial assessment. Every 10 years, we will do a population and housing census. And you want to appreciate that whoever coined this looked at population numbers, but also looked at housing. But we largely see the parameter population overriding the housing parameter with respect to funding, with respect to prioritization. It is an area of interest that I would ask colleagues to look at. I know there are many of you who are on this platform in National Planning Authority, in other influential agencies that could impact on this. The opportunity, people are asking, what is the opportunity in housing? And I want to raise the opportunity in numbers. If we're going to be looking at housing that is for the future, that is sustainable, where we don't lose money. And so if you consider, for instance, the National Housing Policy 2016 captioned a permanent house, one which can build and lives 50 years plus. So if we look at all the entire housing in Uganda, in all 4 domains, and you want to pick buildings that have characteristics, qualities of living 50 years plus, you'll find that if that's what we need, the deficit is about 7 million houses. So if there is that deficit, then that's an opportunity for us to begin to look at whether we can tap into this development. If we lower the grade to same permanent houses, 25 years plus, defined by materials and quality of construction, then the houses become about 5 million. If we look at the temporary houses, all those tents you see, shacks, slums, the deficit will go down. If we lower the grade, then the deficit goes down to about 3 million houses. So still, even if we were to build organized slums, there's still huge opportunity. And I think it's important for members to appreciate that that is the journey, the direction we need to take. Certainly the 50-year plus is the direction we should be looking at. I want to highlight the housing paradox. If you look at this setting, and I want to apologize, some of these pictures in the event that this could be one of your houses, it's done not without any intention. This is between Naguru down in the valley as you come to towards Nakawa. You are able to see the mixed development that we do. And even if we're talking about return on investment, looking at the time horizon we've talked about, up on the hill, you're seeing a huge commercial investment. In between there, you're seeing fair and moderate permanent houses. As you go down in the valley, you see a mixture of things where even VIP latrines, I'm sure, cannot drain anywhere. And you can see a blue roof here. This represents fairly a picture of all our urban establishments, a situation we need to change. If you want to look at the costs living in this environment, medical doctors with us here would tell you sanitation and hygiene and a number of things will not be achieved. And so for sustainability, this is the paradox that we need to be looking at resolving. The environmental, if you look at our service provision, this picture you should read, look at how many trees we will use for both high voltage and low voltage. You look at the acre meters on poles, you look at strands. There's no country that will be looking at power distribution in this kind of arrangement. And all these lines, cables, trees being cut are looking for houses. Mind you, these houses are temporary. So at a time when these houses are erased or demolished, we lose this investment in this service provision. And the case is true for water distribution. It's true for probably internet distribution. It's true for drainage. It's true for all those services. This is the situation that we need to redeem, colleagues, if we are going to make housing to be acceptable. I bring to you the economy model, especially those of you who will be interested in joining us in the real estate and housing. These Sunset Apartments in Kiwatle, and there's every benefit. It's not the state of the art, neither is it the top notch, but the economy model. If we developed many of these estates around the countryside and municipalities, those who are interested in this as a business, this is what you need to be looking at. It creates the environment. The services we're talking about, distribution, become smart. You have uniform quality of life in such an estate. But our focus, colleagues, countries have moved. Because we've talked about land that is inelastic. We'll be talking about growing numbers of our population being one of the leading producers of human beings. We've got to be looking at real estate and housing in this kind of environment. I know we are passionate about standalones, bungalows being on top of the hill, but if you're going to deal with the numbers, you're going to return on your investment, you've got to look at, for instance, these South Korean models. This gives you every benefit in transportation, in energy distribution, in garbage management, name it. You also want to look at the Malaysian Peninsula. Those of you with eyes could look at the buildings and the quality of the buildings on such, probably these are not more than 5 acres. So you want to question yourself, are these buildings occupied? Are they idle? Why do we have idle buildings in town? And you have every answer in how they are able now to manage their transport. You see it's by the seaside, maybe there is also offshore transport. I mean, there is a lot that we can learn from this, and this is where we should be going. We've seen our central business district, Kampala, and other municipalities and now cities transforming, but those who are investing in those properties are not returning because you don't have maneuverability. Transport is a problem, parking is a problem, and yet we've got to look at housing that is functional, that can return on your investment. When we talk the temporary housing, 20% the countryside has infrastructure that looks like this. You'll pick this on your way to along, maybe. If you do criticism or assessment, one, you realize that power is running on top and none of these houses are tapping, simply because these houses can have a wiring certificate. So the earlier we get out of such infrastructure, the better to benefit from power that is running. I also want to believe this road that runs alongside, probably none of these residents has a vehicle that parks by the side. I'm also sure that national water, even if they have made a lot of water coverage, I doubt these guys could only benefit from a tap stand. I'm addressing housing from a holistic perspective, that housing is not just the four walls. Housing must be functional. For housing to return on investment, you must have all these amenities connected. So if you look at such a setting, which is widespread in the countryside, then you realize the other opportunity I talked of 7 million houses or even 5 coming down to 3, you realize we have a big job to transform this state of affairs. When you come home to Kampala, this is your traditional kasokoso. It's appalling for us to be looking at this state of housing and this business activity, and then we keep quiet, we sleep over it. Some of us could sleep in fairly decent places, but all our towns have these pockets. They are not even pockets. In subsequent slides, you'll be able to see scenarios growing bigger because the population and numbers are growing, and the sector is not addressed to the extent that it should be. So I think we have a big job to do. I want to further highlight the business opportunity in numbers. And these figures, many of you know them, you can qualify them. If we are about 45 million people today, and if our growth rate is about 3 to 4%, if you apply 3% to 45 or 4% 45, you get about 1.5 million. These are numbers that are produced on Ugandan soil per year. Even if colleagues we said, let's forget the deficit we have currently, and we start to make sure we meet the needs for the population we create going forward. And these numbers have exponential aspect. They don't remain static, because once you have 1 million people today, tomorrow is 1.2, 1.2 will produce 1.8, 1.8. In about 20 years to come, the population will be double. So the opportunity is, even if we started now to plan for those numbers that are coming on board, it's such a huge opportunity. And if you take an average of about 5 people per household, I know many of them are 7, but the average is about 5, then you realize that the 1.5 divided by 5, you need about 300,000 units, new units in the residential subsector. if we are to plan for our children going forward. The current production rate is about 60 to 80,000. This is not comparable, not comparable to the 300 that we need. But also if you marry what we've seen, the substandard, and we look at the permanent housing requirement, then the demand, which translates into an opportunity for future development, moves from 300,000 units to about 500 units. Colleagues, I want to highlight facts. I said today's presentation may generate this initial thinking to drive your thought process into joining the sector and probably look at the interventions you need to come with on board. Housing, and this I pray if our number one, the president, is listening on this show. For us, we must prioritize housing because it is the world's biggest infrastructure. We have captioned infrastructure to mean water, power, roads, but the infrastructure called housing, if you aggregated even Uganda's case, and you looked at the money in that sector, somebody who's building a toilet, somebody who's building a kitchen, somebody who's building his house, somebody building an apartment, and you aggregate it, it is the biggest economic driver globally. It holds the biggest amount of money in development. So I think I've skipped. Land earlier mentioned degrades the environment. Colleagues, the reason why we need as a NSOBA fraternity to pay critical attention to this sector, that for all housing happening above ground, if you stand on a hill, you'll see houses which have replaced the green, the trees. You'll see forests being cut for houses. So at this rate, you'll know that the environment will not exist should we not pay attention to housing. I should also add that the rest of the infrastructure, be it roads, be it water is underground, you could do power underground, but the only sensitive infrastructure that degrades the environment is housing. So we need to pay attention. But like I've mentioned in Uganda as a case, we are still doing housing above ground. Other countries are doing below ground, but so that means that the environment will not survive if we continue the horizontal sprawl that we are doing with our housing. Of course, the basic need for human existence that I can't overemphasize. I've talked about lifespan. If the buildings have to live those many years, they live longer than the beings that built them. An average lifespan for Ugandan, even if you hit 80 years, if you put up a housing infrastructure which is 200 years, certainly it has lived, and so the need to develop it with caution. It is the only sector in our country where the developer pays the total investment cost. As you come to this business, you'll know that it is private sector led. And so unlike other infrastructure where government provides entire infrastructure through guarantees, of course, they provide budgets, they guarantee the budgets, they guarantee funding, they provide roads, power, water, and others, drainage. But for housing, you'll start from start to end, you'll have to foot the bill yourself. So you pay the total price. And that's why the return, when you're looking at the period, your return, part of this cost will not just be the 4 walls that you put up, but will also include those services that come along. Later on, if I'm able, I'll share with you a life cycle model, which is the OPEX side, the operation side. The moment housing has been, you've done your house, you have operating costs. But we also know that if we have well-planned and organized settlements, this result in cheaper service provision and life cycle costs. I have one slide where I will highlight this to you. To interest you, those of you who live, of course, in bungalows, I desire to live in one if I was the only one on this planet, but I'll also show you how that can come down. Services like roads, water supply, power distribution, storm drainage, security, telecommunication, all of them derive their development and operating costs from how housing infrastructure is organized and developed. Close your eyes and say you lift housing out of Kampala. You will see water lines running endlessly to nowhere. Because these are services to housing, and so housing should be sent before you think of the rest of the development, and that's a fact. Planning is a must. We've seen housing happening in a very disorganized way, in a disorganized manner. Nothing demonstrates that we have professionals I've mentioned above. If you look at all the settlements, the paradox I presented, you really wonder, you can't see anything in line, you can't see how one benefits from the other. So we need to look at how we quickly look at planning as a solution to the future development. Of course, affordability is achieved through appropriate technology and funding, this I mentioned. And once we have gotten the two right, then we'll be able to meet the needs of the bigger community. I want to confirm that indeed real infrastructure is housing. Roads, water, energy are services. The focus on housing is the real infrastructure, and we should pay attention. I've mentioned the global framework. And future infrastructure is going to be housing. With growing numbers, Uganda's case, I want to interest you. But lastly, on 11, I want to interest you in the housing supply and value chains. I want to say housing has the longest value chain. If you looked at all those professionals I've mentioned, if you looked at industrial production, trying to drive to create materials for housing, but also if you looked at the labor aspect, it will employ right from Yasoma, Natasoma, a professional, non-professional, even you as the product owner, you factor in and you find it has a huge contribution to our economy, about 13–15% of the GDP. So it's that important, but has not been centrally placed. And so I call on voices from NSOBA and the membership that will drive that agenda. Land use. We talked that it is land and development, permanent development on it. I want to use this analogy of our Sunset Apartments I've talked about. This is the estate that you see here. It sits on 15 acres. It is close to 300 units. If you take an analogy of 300 units times 5 people, you're talking about 1,500 people. If each of these was to have their own home, I'm sure if we release these homes, they would cover the entire probably Ntinda and part of Naria and Nigeria area. But look, they are contained in 15 acres, and as we've seen, lifestyle is different. This is your Metroplex and the road, the expressway, Northern Bypass. This is the lifestyle. I want to advocate for this type of living. We've seen, yes, it saves land, but when you look at the environment, it brings a uniform economic muscle. People reason together, people can agree easily, and that is going to take us to development. This estate, we've done it in Namungona, those of you who know that area. As you notice, the black is National Housing Estate, trying to address the slum environment. And like I mentioned, the biggest monies are running in real estate, but in a very disorganized way. All these houses put together, if they had gotten guidance as to how they can establish themselves, I'm sure their quality of life would be different. But look how we set it up, and we want to make sure we escalate this model. This is the last estate that we've done on a horizontal basis because it was targeting the elderly. Estates must be functional, houses must be functional. You're seeing houses, once they are vertical and you don't have the lifts and the other services, then our elderly group are not taken care of. So if you have a parent who needs such a unit, I want to guarantee that this could be one of the last one. But importantly, how do we resolve this paradox around Kampala? In that estate, you'll be able to see these houses if you visit. That's how it looks. And I want to interest you to move and acquire a unit. On a broader perspective, that is the same estate. Look at it as organized as it is, as decent. Once you're inside that estate, you'll never know that the environment all around looks like this. This is the opportunity that must change. And for most of these buildings, they are going to be replaced. Like I mentioned, when you go to the CBD, the buildings we saw there, those bibandas where they were repairing watches, all of them are no longer there now. So it's kujenga na kubomoa, and every time we demolish, because we built wrong infrastructure, we didn't give it a time horizon. So we lose that money at that point. Now I can guarantee you, this being in the CBD, all this housing infrastructure will be replaced in the next 10–15 years, and that will be a loss. So we need to look at how we address it. I want to invite you to find an apartment at our Jasmine Apartments in NTARE. On completion, they are like that. I've mentioned Mbarara, that is the estate, if you know, as you face Mary Hill, as you look down to the bridge, as you look down to the River Rizi, this estate is already created and available for you. It's on sale and running. But importantly, when you look at on the 4 acres, again, what we are modeling, this is functional housing. Those of you who want to go into real estate and housing, you must look at this kind of approach. Yes, I mentioned your River Rizi is down there and the site is right there, and the golf course, the environment, and the Kaijuka Stadium. So right from this estate, you are able to stretch, have recreational facilities that will be able to enable your day-to-day exercising and doing those sporting events. That's how it looks like. I want to interest you into these numbers, colleagues. These are properties that have been invoked by national housing. The Chiwana, the Rubowa, the Sunset I've talked about. And I want particularly to look at the densities, because the issue of land, the issue of service provision I've alluded to. You realize that, for instance, the Jasmine I've showed you, if we have 58 units sitting on 1 acre, the highest density we've achieved is about 365 per acre. But if you look back to the South Korean experience, or even the Malaysian experience, they have hit 1,000 per acre. And this is the way they have made land available for other services and other production for agriculture, save that for us, we are sprawling horizontally and therefore killing land for that production. When you go down to number 10, and you look at the average Kampala, I know the population could now be about 2 million people, but the acreage for Kampala is 43,000. Now, the average of that is 39. 39 is so low that if you deal with 39 as a density per acre, you will never return on that project. If you're going to be doing bungalows going horizontal, you could have become cheaper, but because you are holding lesser numbers, I mean, you'll never return, I can guarantee you. I will let you read this in your free time once this is shared. I mentioned housing being the cradle for other infrastructure needs, particularly those in the planning side of things. I want to interest you in these percentages and the benefits we are losing. One, for instance, in optimization of land, about 50%, we are losing land where we seem to be putting development. We could have saved this land. Reduced land conflicts. If you go into estates where people are going vertical, there's no wrangles, there's no conflict. They stay as colleagues, as friends. But look at when we go sprawl. These conflicts could be reduced the 40 and 50%, and the Ministry of Land is much of the time running with these conflicts on land. Of course, it eliminates growth of slums, 30 to 40% if we adopt this planned and vertical growth. It creates housing that is taxable. Senior colleague John Musingus, if he's listening in, the biggest tax revenue generator for any economy, like I mentioned, is housing, because it's permanent. You can't hide it. You can't put it under carpet. Now, once that housing is organized, is coded, then you are able to tax it. And this taxation, you've seen in developed economies, UK, US, Germany, they thrive on the taxes on housing. It reduces infrastructure development costs. Like I mentioned, if you ask National Water, those colleagues from National Water listening in, you may be going 10 kilometers to reach houses in a kilometer distance, simply because pipes are not planned and they will run behind houses and they go wherever you can't imagine. That cost of water infrastructure, energy infrastructure could come down by those percentages. There is the infrastructure waste. I've mentioned whenever we replace buildings, we've lost, and that is infrastructure waste. You demolish a building, the related associated services are disconnected, are also lost to the extent of 20 to about 30% we could save. Distance and travel time. Those of you who suffer traffic jams around, I can tell you our roads from here to Mbarara, from here to Mbale, you go in a direction you don't think you're going Tumbare or Mbarara, simply because you must dodge a tree here, dodge a house here, dodge an establishment at the other corner. We could save and reduce the distance and travel time by that margin. The traffic jams I've mentioned. Security enhancement, colleagues in the security subsector. I know we've introduced cameras, but without organized housing, the cameras can only do as much, maybe 10%, 20% for those who are on the main road streams and junctions. But if you remember the first picture I relayed, where houses you cannot even access with a border, then you cannot manage security. So we shall forever invest in security without greater success. But if we organize, if we got organized housing, 20 to 30% could be saved. Energy supply and distribution, the same. The floods and associated drainage, because buildings are not allowed drainage. When it rains on your house, water moves the neighbor sends it to the neighbor who must have drainage system. But if we did this, then the floods could be history, and we could begin to look in a very organized and good sanitation environment. Of course, it minimizes illegal connections. There are power losses and energy losses that are mentioned right from all the service providers to the extent of 30 to 40%. So this can go down by 50 to 60% because every house will be coded, you know it, and it pays for the service it consumes. Energy and water losses is another area. Communication and ICT, I want to tell you this would be handy if you're going to be taking fiber optic. This to make housing functional, you certainly would have this come handy if housing is organized. Garbage management costs. Our cities are smelly, not because we are eating, not because we have a disorganized housing environment. In the estates I've showed above, collection of garbage is coordinated. And so you can't have these issues persisting at a household level when we have organized housing. And this can come down 40 to 50%. I already mentioned the environmental protection and preservation, sanitation and hygiene standards, communicable diseases, and other health-related illnesses. Doctors on this platform will attest that the patients they see on a daily, if they ask, what is your location? Where do you stay? Many of them stay in these slums that we're talking about, simply because the environment cannot afford them good health. Of course, it enhances BUBU through the manufacture of the materials, supply of local construction materials, and supply and value chains as mentioned. Job creation, I mentioned about this, and potential to employ all brackets of Ugandans. It boosts effectiveness of professionals. Now we are conflicting in the marketplace, like I mentioned. You look at infrastructure and you say, who designed this? Simply because the design is at household plot level. So I want to plead with members on this platform that for avoidance of this conflict in the professionals bracket, we've got to think about redeeming our housing sector. Of course, it eases the cost of doing business. We also look at 26 enables agricultural productivity. Land that is fertile, Uganda's land is very fertile for agricultural production. You want to think of how much we've lost simply because it is covered by houses. Of course, it eliminates mixed development, high infrastructure costs. Slums I've mentioned, eliminates perimeter walls. Now the trouble with the perimeter walls and the costs associated with them. Each one of us, once you have a bungalow standalone, you want to further make yourself a prisoner right in there. It's a huge cost, but I want to tell you it's very unnecessary. This can be eliminated once we look at organized and planned estate. We've discovered oil and gas, colleagues. And those of you in the geology science, you know that gas is the near to use, ready to use. It's what will be extracted first. What will only be required is to do the purification, to code it, to give it the smell, to know that, for instance, this is cooking gas. But as long as we still have housing that is in the state that it is, we are not going to benefit from the gas that is available to us. We'll remain a charcoal economy. However, if we decide today, colleagues, to drive the agenda for housing, we shall benefit from the gas that has been discovered right within Uganda. Of course, it facilitates common way live for services. When you go to developed countries, you'll find that all the services, water, energy, power, can run under one common way live. Ginger Road, for instance, beneath, the vehicles could run on top, underneath electrical cables are running, water is running, because all are targeting the same user at the end of the road is a housing estate. Now, you'll find National Water buying land as a well-if, women looking for land, then the road is sitting on land, and when you aggregate those costs, certainly as an economy, we're not going to develop if we don't address the question of housing and begin to look at common well-ifs. It forms an effective basis for evaluation of household wealth. Even when we look at the parish model, even when we look at the other models that we've done, there is a reason why we are talking of household wealth. A house is a critical unit for measuring wealth. And so I cannot overemphasize this. It is important that we certainly look at how we address this challenge. Of course, is in design, routing, and alignment of infrastructure. When you travel, like I mentioned, you're seeing roads going into wetlands, high cost. These roads shouldn't be going into wetlands if we had organized housing infrastructure, but many times they are avoiding little houses that are placed here and there. Of course, it would help us reform the transport system. Why we have the taxi and the border system, colleagues, is to convince you simply because everybody will be saying mass out, because I mean, you should enter a stage and get out at a stage. If we are going to look at the bus transport, if you're going to look at trams, if you're going to look at trains giving us a service, then we must have a common start and a common destiny. But as long as we are pressed everywhere, if our housing is not organized, colleagues will remain quite a border economy and a tax economy that is costly with all its challenges. Of course, septic tanks, as an engineer, I will tell you, most of those houses will never connect on a sewer system. This is deterrent in yourselves. If you have a house which is connected to a VIP latrine or a septic tank, then you can be sure that your customers will not have high appetite for your apartments. So if we reform or realign, then all the systems could be connected on the sewer system, and we eliminate the septic tanks and the latrines. These have a big effect on the underground waters, but also ultimately the water that we treat at Lake Victoria, which is supposed to be clean water, ultimately the cost of treatment goes high. It returns on a bill in a house. I would want to interest those who are listening in that we need to save the hilltops. Engineering provides that if you took water to the hills, you could gravitate it to the houses for water supply, telecommunication, and security positioning. The valleys, you don't want to be pumping sewage. We've started to see this happening. Estates whose location cannot afford sewer drainage. And we need to allow valleys, not just simply for wetland, but to make sure that they help us to drain our homes. Of course, our current mixed development model is the most expensive, but also risks, including high insurance premium. Allow me mention, I'm really presenting the basics. If you looked at a Total petrol station near Communications House, opposite is Uganda House, and all the infrastructure around it, Blackline's house. If I'm an insurance company going to take premium for Communications House, this premium is going to be so high simply because the risk is right at the doorstep, the petrol station. The risk may never crystallize, but it is there. So colleagues, ultimately, I want to suggest that organized housing guarantees profitability, value for money, faster economic gains, and we should be looking at if we want to attain the middle income status. I want to take you to the visuals. You could easily interpret this photograph being Bugorobi on one side. Those are the apartments done by National Housing and the Middle East, planned, organized. You see every green, you see recreation areas, you see green spaces, but also you want to know that, like I mentioned, if you release these numbers, they could have absorbed the entire area. But just across the valley is your NTARE. Colleagues, this is the housing we are talking about. That's an opportunity, but we need to address it as urgently as possible. These guys on a daily look across, these are the guys who come to steal here. These are the guys who give you sleepless nights, but you're your brothers. They are our brothers and sisters because they seem to be constrained in terms of provision of housing. And we need to reform this scenario. I was asked to highlight a few challenges. Of course, one, housing is discrete. It's both an opportunity, but also a challenge that once you buy your 15 decimals or 1 acre, you are able to plan within that 1 acre and be seen to develop. But that desperate nature has also been a deterrent, because then everybody is planning in a silo environment. It is unregulated and uncontrolled. This would be asking colleagues in government in those dockets. You want to wonder if KCCA is up and active, if Kira municipality is up and resourced. Why should we be seeing this housing that makes us make losses on a daily? Of course, we see a lot of professionalism. It distorts the market. People think of quack engineers, quack architects. Surely this shouldn't be, because the sector is not regulated, is not controlled. Of course, the lack of zoning and physical infrastructure plans is such a big issue. Developed economies will gazette areas for residential. And if you look at what national housing has done in the past, for instance, when we built Ntinda Minister's Village, we further built the Naria housing estate. Everybody started looking at that direction as a residential neighborhood. Now, if you get the mixed development and we have not zoned these areas, it creates housing to be very expensive, but also over both the capex and the opex. Of course, lack of development capital, I've talked about it, particularly for mass rollout. The individual developments will not carry us forward. Lack of one-stop center for investment. Even when you go to Uganda Investment Authority, they will not be able to classify for you investors ready to deal with real estate, to deal with housing. But also lack of appropriate data and statistics. At national housing, we have records, we have statistics, but they are limited to our business framework. You need national data that guides national development if you're going to look at housing for Uganda's case. There's a challenge with the mortgages. These are very high, 18 to 25%. Those of you colleagues in the banks listening in, given that housing is long-term, banks should have the muscle to bring mortgages to between 2% to about 5% max. That way you're able to make housing available to most Ugandans and to all of us. Of course, there's lack of support for long-term financing. Housing is being financed by short-term products. Banks will give you 3 years with high collaterals. Until we tap into long-term funds for long-term investment, then housing and real estate will remain a nightmare, colleagues listening in. Lack of infrastructure support for developers. If you're going to go into this business, you'll struggle to pull water at a cost, you'll struggle to pull energy at a cost, you'll struggle to bring the road at a cost. These costs loaded onto your other construction cost makes the product damn expensive. Of course, there's the taxation and the tax regime. Taxes are not consolidated for housing development, both to the private and to the public. And colleagues right in the tax body, we need to look at how we consolidate taxes to make housing, which is the cradle, the critical asset we need to perform. Of course, the development standards, which lack and associated with lack of enforcement. You want to know if the building standards generated by Ministry of Works are universal. Why should I see infrastructure in Kampala different from Mukono, different from Kira? So there's an issue of development standards. But I had mentioned the land tenure, which is largely responsible for the disorganization we see. People will tell you this is Kabaka's land, so it can afford to be a slum. This is Milo land, it can afford to have this kind of development. This one, they never developed there. No, the land tenure issue must be addressed as a matter of urgency. As I conclude, colleagues, the strategies that we need to look at: prioritize planning for organized housing. We need to look at prioritizing funding for housing. We've funded roads, but we've never funded housing, even at government level, but also in the attraction of investors who have money. This has not happened. But we could also create a housing fund because houses are long-term. You need a regulatory body to look at housing. This would help in regulating, controlling, and coordinating the housing infrastructure development in the country, both urban and rural. We are concerned about the urban development, colleagues, but you know how our urban centers come up. It starts like under a mango tree, it becomes a border stage, it grows into a little, 2 shops come up. I mean, and ultimately it is declared a town council, it becomes a municipality, and soon later it becomes a city. This, we must control it now. We need to advocate for vertical growth than horizontal growth. We have a condominium law that supports vertical growth, and the space that you cannot exhaust is the vertical space, which we need to look at as we look at investing in housing. We need to attract long-term low interest rate financing, but importantly, we need to adopt partnerships, joint ventures, and collaboration. As in NSOBA, like I mentioned, we are a big group. We could come together beyond collecting Mabugo, begin to look at ourselves whether as a circle, but pulling resources together for development. I mentioned the products that we have, and you wanted to know the terms if you wanted to buy a unit at National Housing. But indeed, these are also applicable to the other developers in the marketplace. Of course, if you've paid 100%, we hand over the title to you. There are people who have their 100% payment. We allow entry on once you've paid 50%, and you can pay the balance in 3 years. But even after 3 years, we are able to look at your performance. If there is a need for slightly more period, we are able to grant it. And we are reviewing the 50%. We've received a fair number of complaints, and hopefully we can move to 30%. Of course, we run a mortgage scheme through a partnership with Housing Finance Bank, where National Housing is shareholder, and other banks. But like as mentioned, they are quite expensive, but it's a window for you to acquire a facility. We have a model with what we call rent-to-own scheme, where indeed you come in, and once we assess your ability to pay, for the period you're in, you do part renting as you pay towards acquisition. Of course, we also have a pure rental scheme in Mbarara, in Namungoda, and the assets that are coming up. Those of you who want decent living, you can approach us for those facilities. We accept pre-sales on products that we are developing. For instance, the NTARE Pride, the 300, 400 units that are going to be coming up. If you come to us early, once we have your resources early, it would help us to bring down the cost of the product. And this happens as the project progresses. Of course, that is payment during construction. I will leave you to look at this slide, and particularly to convince you the costs you incur when you're a standalone unit, whether in Bugorobi, in high end or low end, versus if you stayed in the condominium units. We need to change our mindset. When you look at, for instance, the model for Ntinda, I've picked, if you're going to have security guards, for instance, a guard who is armed paying at about 500 per month, and you go down water supply, you have power supply, you maintain your own road at the gate or up to your house, you maintain all garbage management, compound maintenance, gas installation, which has not happened, but telecoms. When you go down, colleagues, to line 19, which is subtotal, per month you find, and I want you to confirm this through the discussion, that you are paying about 1 million shillings in those petty services that you offer by yourself. Never mind that the security guard you deploy could become actually a risk to yourself. Relatedly, when you look at Kiwatule condominium, which is a Sunset, on a month, those of you who are staying there, you pay about 65,000 per month to meet the costs enumerated along, for instance, a bungalow in Ntinda. So somebody who is paying 1 million shillings and is with all the inconvenience of carrying garbage in your car and maintaining your lawns, and those who come to loan are the thieves themselves sometimes, compared to somebody who pays 65,000 and is sleeping. All this is done through the condominium board. When you prorate this over a period of 10 years, you have paid about 126 million in those services that you do yourself. Relatedly, somebody in a condominium establishment would have paid about 7.8 million. If you project this to about 40 years, you'll have your operational costs will go to about 500 million versus 31 million over the same period. I'm convinced that as colleagues of the fraternity, you need to look at this model with passion, look at the risks you hold every time you stay. Sometimes if you're driving to your own apartment or your house, the associated risks, but for the apartments, traffic is always moving and you are fairly secured. I want to thank you and I want to invite you for discussions. In the subsequent discussions, we could look at how we can profit from the other domains of housing, industrial. We could look at the commercial side of things, but also institutional. But for now, I think most of the indications I've given by and large fall within the residential subsector. Chair, I beg to submit.
Thank you, Engineer Kenneth. Now, I don't know how to thank you because you see, when you're online Zoom, I don't know what normally we're supposed to do. How do we give a standing ovation? How do we give, I don't know. That's a new normal. Thanks for that powerful presentation, powerful attendance. For a record, we have not gone beyond 90. Today we reached 121 at some point. Mobilizing 120 OBs, on one platform is as hard as a rich man going to, yeah, to that one. Now, we're going to open up the session, but already we have many questions which we picked from the other side of the chat. But I want to recognize the presence of Fande Robert Munanura, Commissioner of Prisons, I think. Senior statistician, Dr. Ben Paul Mungereza, he has been with us, Dr. Alex Muganzi, Dr. Alan Mpire, Dr. Kataha, Dr. Stephen Kusasira, and of course, Senior Mark. The doctors have titles, so we can't miss them out. Other titles, Haji Yasin Sendaula, and Cuthbert Isinguma. Cuthbert gave us a powerful presentation on real estate last weekend, and we decided to get into housing for this weekend. I saw some rental online. I don't know whether that was my entertainment prefect. I saw Alan Amumpe, was that, I think, a head boy at one time. I saw Ebo Kagumire, and he posted something that when you live in an organized estate like the ones of national housing, it's even easier for the tax collectors. I think Kagumire is a commissioner, commissioner customs, URA, yeah, I think. A special recognition for the ladies, Jackie, Victoria, Belinda, Ameria, whom I saw online, and the rest will follow. Now, straight to the questions, I'll just read a few which I've picked from the chat side. First of all, Engineer, you didn't talk about, someone was asking, does housing include lodges? I don't know why Lions somehow get interested in the topic of lodges. Every time you're making a presentation and you don't mention about lodges, it doesn't go well with us. Okay, those are some of the questions which I managed to pick. The first one, most banks are lending above 17%, which makes the cost of financing high. What are the most viable solutions to make real estate profitable by reducing the cost of capital? I think, Kenneth, you'll take some notes so that you can answer them at once as you wind up. Someone is asking, what are the prices of your houses? You have many estates, so I don't think it will be easy for you to, but you can add them in your presentation, the prices of the houses. Then another one, what solution could be structured out of this COVID model? Oh, it was a copy and paste, sorry. I know you're reading it. Do we have patient capital funders in real estate? And what are the long-term implications of the above? I've never heard of patient capital funders. It's my first time I'm hearing it. What are the next one? What are the long-term implications of the tax regime in Uganda? Gentlemen, I'm going to open up the session of questions. What are the long-term implications of the tax regime in Uganda? I guess the long-term implications towards the housing sector. Then the second last one, does national housing have fiber optic cable provision? Now these are the real time of bids. We are looking for houses, people are looking for fiber houses with fiber optical access. I would like to know the digitization gaps in the housing sector that would bring the cost of acquisition down, affordability issue. Okay, as national housing, what solutions are in place? Not so clear, but I'm sure engineer, you've picked that. What have the national and housing projects why have the projects taken very long to complete? Is it a business forecasting issue? Okay, those are the questions we have from the chat side. Paul Sawe, I can hear your dogs are complaining. Then another question here, the last one, which I'm picking from the chat side. This one comes in from one of the ladies. What other opportunities do you offer as national housing? What other training? Do you offer training opportunities as national housing? Are there internship placements? Okay, Belinda, that one we shall sort it after the session. And I know engineer has picked that. Someone is looking for internship, but we shall sort that one after this. The last one, Kenneth, who owns the Kasokoso land? I personally witnessed the burning of Chira Mayor's car as the sellers reacted to the purported owners. How can the law help to fix this bogus problem of land grabbing? Hey, Afande, you're getting angry now. Okay, thanks Ken for the presentation. We lose a lot of land. Okay, let's open up. Please put up your hand so that we can be more organized. This session will take around 10 minutes and then we'll allow Engineer Kenneth to wind up as he responds to our questions. Those who have questions, please, you raise your hand, then you unmute and you do the needful. Afande Robert Munanura, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I actually asked the last question, but let me get the clear answer for it. I personally witnessed the burning of the Mayor Kira's vehicle because the settlers were not happy with some people who were moving around, I think, to re-own the land. But I was told that this land belongs to national housing. But overall, I think there are very many people who have grabbed pieces of land in Kampala, in these urban areas. I wonder how national housing is using the law to make sure that it stops this nonsense of grabbing land and then it becomes settler. And in doing that, you do your own developments that are not on plan, no sewage lines, no sewage system. I wonder how and how much national housing is trying to react to this.
I guess I should probably first answer these. The hands that may be coming up could also be asking probably related questions.
Okay, it's okay, Ken, if you can go ahead and answer.
Yes, there was a question whether lodges are included in housing. Certainly, that's the commercial side of housing business. And I want to confirm, yes, whether lodges, whether guest houses, they are all included, whoever asked this question. Somebody's talking about the loans and the cost of capital being high. I alluded to this being 17% plus. The engagement we are having is that even when the CBR, for instance, in the COVID periods now, when the CBR has dropped as low as 6.5, the central bank rate, banks are not responding to lower the interest rates because they project that the future risks could surpass the current CBR. And so then they maintain the loans rates high. The common developers and individuals are not benefiting from the lowered CBR rate. I think being Chigani or somebody from Bank of Uganda should be able to tell us as a regulator of these financial institutions, how can we benefit from the lowered CBR? But indeed, how can the regulator enable banks give us affordable capital? Somebody talked about prices of our houses. I want to suggest that soon after we close, I think I'll share a flyer which has all our products and all the prices and locations so that you can have it on yourself. You can choose a unit of your choice. Somebody was asking about, I think, a solution on, I think I've not picked it properly, but somebody was talking about patient capital. Patient capital is capital that waits. It is patient. It has the patience to return. This is long-term capital. Now, the only way you can attract patient capital, our economy is not yet robust to offer us this kind of capital. Even if you went to NSSF, they're overhyped. You're not likely to get the capital that you need, for instance, for 3 million houses. Now, development partners, investors out there have these monies, but what has been lacking is securing guarantees for them. If somebody is going to roll money in this economy and there is not even a paper guarantee, we've seen guarantees running for road projects, for energy projects, for oil and gas projects, but not for housing. And this is where the critical need is. So for us to be able to attract patient, long-term, low-interest capital, then we've got to make sure that government comes on board and offers some of these securities that the investors or lenders would desire to pick for the sector. Somebody talked about what are the implications for the long-term, the tax regime. I think Wana Ebo Kagumire is online. This would be a question that I would toss to colleagues on the show at URA. But I had earlier mentioned that we need to have these taxes consolidated. Houses are built right from household level. The understanding and appreciation of the tax regime could be for me and you, the elite. But people who are building, who will not appreciate now when you pay tax on cement, you're paying tax on this, you're paying tax on this. As long as it is housing, which is permanent, we need to see how we can consolidate this tax. We'll be discussing probably in another session the rental aspects and the rental tax and the landlord-tenant relationships, who loses, who gains, But tax, I beg that the tax authorities, our colleagues John and Ebo on this platform could help us elucidate on this. Somebody was asking whether we offer fiber optic provision. The estates we built when fiber optics had not come do not have them, but they have inbuilt, those of you stay in those estates, provisions, the first fix, the conduits, the ducts, which can enable you for most of those units to be able to do connectivity. However, we also take note that with the development, like I've talked about, for instance, gas, for all our estates, old, current, and going forward, it is possible that we can run a copper pipe and make sure we supply gas to all those units, hence enhancing their functionality. But if you're going to distribute gas, which is extremely dangerous, the way we distribute water, I can tell you we'll never get there. Like I mentioned, we'll remain a charcoal economy. So for all services not provided, given that our estates and for all those other developers who are developing on organized and planned designs, it is possible that these services can be provided subsequent. I think somebody was asking about digitization gap, acquisition down. If we digitize, can the acquisition costs come down? It's a technology world. I think I would invite you to discuss this. And earlier on, I said we invite collaborators and service providers who can help housing and real estate be more functional. So if this can bring the cost down, it's welcome. We'd want to look at how it would contribute. Somebody was asking about opportunities for training. Yes, we do mass industrial training, but of course, we only can accommodate commensurate with the projects that would be running. But also because we have a lot of professional in-house staff, many of these can benefit from even in-house, even if you're not at the project site, get this training. So we normally run them, and at an appropriate time, we get applications and we enroll. Somebody asks about who owns Kasokoso land. Now, Kasokoso Land National Housing owns 292 acres.
Let me walk up and come back. Just 20 minutes is enough for me, but
I think there was an interference. I mentioned Kasokoso Land National Housing owns about 292 acres. Now, at a time when I think Mayor Mamerito's car was banned, of course, the residents in Kasokoso, I hope probably some of us on the platform could also be residents there. The issues in Kasokoso is not only national housing land, because that slum spans beyond national housing land. But the residents, many of whom moved from Naguru Nakawa for projects that didn't take off, are certainly aggrieved parties. Now, relatedly, you have politics playing in Kasokoso that you have seen. National Housing owning 292 acres under a financing framework. The population, I think Kasokoso has about 30,000 houses. And so you're talking about a total population of about maybe 10,000 or thereabout. This, if we provided a solution, which is the vertical solution, you can consolidate these guys and they can be part and parcel of the project. So they think when a day somebody is coming to drive them away, you drive them from Kasokoso, they will pitch camp elsewhere. The way they moved from Naguru Nakawa and they pitched camp in Kasokoso. So the solution is provided, both as government, those of you are listening, but also as developers, is to find those funds, whether under grant, under slum upgrade and redevelopment, to see how the Kasokoso people can be incorporated in the development. That way they will accept, they will appreciate the project. I think that was related to what Munanura Robert clarified, and I think that's all I've been able to pick, colleagues. Over to you back, Chair.
Kenneth, I need first check if there are other people willing, ready to fire their questions. We'll allow around 5 people. Those who are ready, please, you can unmute and ask your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kenneth, for that presentation. I would like to know if there are those apartments which are between Senana and Uganda Primary School, which are being occupied by I don't know which people, but their plumbing doesn't look appetizing, and usually I even park there when I don't have cash on me, or when that parking space on Uganda Road is full. I don't know if that is also under NHCC, and I don't know who manages it, but what happens after all the units of NHCC are filled? Who takes care of security? Who takes care of the renovation? Don't you think that would again be another source of insecurity and the disease that would be running from those slums and other unplanned settlements? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Sydney. Cuthbert, make it brief. Cuthbert.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ms. Kenneth, for the good presentation. One thing I wanted to know, these days, when you plan these high-end residential apartments, you don't seem to plan for the people who work within those estates. When you look at the previous plannings, the people had before the colonial masters had, they could plan the high end, but they also planned for the low and medium, so that the people who will be working, maybe the house boys and the house girls, live in a certain community somewhere near. Because take an example, you planned in Nalia, but sometimes people who work from Nalia come from as far as Kasokoso, because they can leave. So how would you plan for those people? Because sometimes these places don't have made places where they can sleep, so they have to move back to their locations. So do you have those plans for the people in the new estates you're planning? Do you have where you can plan for such a type of category of people? Thank you.
Thank you, Cuthbert. Ninsima, you have something to say?
Yes. Good evening. Thank you,
Good
Engineer.
evening.
Such a nice talk. Yeah, I have two things to ask. One, how would you advise someone building to determine their rent? And then second, I'm a student of MOBS. I would love to do intern with national housing, but do more of the intern, not the outside, not the on-site, since I don't know so much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ninsima. Kenneth has noted that. Next. This is next. We just have like only 5 minutes, then Kenneth runs.
Chair, you'll have to remind me of
let me read what I have here.
Okay.
Number one, you didn't pick Nincima's question. Okay, she will ask again.
I'll beg you give her, being the only lady who has asked, she'll give her an opportunity to clarify her question.
I'll give her an opportunity to ask again. Do you go, okay, there's a question here. Do you go into partnerships with landlords for estate development? Then number two, has National Housing considered working with the National Building Review Board? Then the next one, what is the current pricing model for the housing units currently available at National Housing? Then the next one, why has National Housing allowed National Social Security Fund to grab your housing mandate? Shouldn't NSSF stay in their lane? Then the last one is from Ninsima, which was saying that when you build a house, how do you determine rent? But I'll ask her to ask the question again. Then the last one here is saying, we lose a lot of land through the built up tombs and that are scattered everywhere in the country. Does National Housing have gazetted areas in our cities for organized cemeteries? That is the last one I've picked from the chat side. Victoria, let's also give an opportunity to Victoria, being, I guess, another lady there. Victoria?
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Victoria.
Victoria, go ahead.
Thank you very much. My name is Victoria Nanozi from
Victoria, you're too low. We can't hear you, I'm sure. You're too low.
Wow. How about now? Is that better?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, Moses Sanyu.
Victoria, I was.
Can hear Victoria Dixon get another gadget.
Moses Sanyu.
Hello, how about now?
Gentlemen, when you put your hand up and I mention your name, kindly unmute and ask your question so that we can.
Victoria, we can hear you.
I can hear Victoria. She can come through.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Victoria Nanozi from the Association of Real Estate Agents, Uganda. I'm a visitor in this meeting, particularly I followed Engineer Kaijuka. I wanted to listen to his presentation. I want to applaud him and National Housing for for whatever they are doing in the real estate sector. And I want to also appreciate him for this presentation and for especially advocating for the sector. We appreciate the sector is still growing. It still has a lot of opportunities for growth. I want to appreciate him for that presentation, for presenting the opportunities and also the challenges, and the fact that he has emphasized that yeah, we can all, as we are here, we can do something in the sector to see it grow to better heights. So thank you so much. Glad I've been able to listen in. Now, thank you.
Senior Mark, you're next. Senior.
Can you hear me?
Senior Mark, we can hear you, please. We can hear you.
Thank you, Engineer Kenneth, for that very elaborate presentation. My quick one it was a good summation, but not in depth. There are some areas, especially on your last slide, which now started being dramatic and giving us numbers comparing the advantages of vertical versus horizontal. I think these are the things that we need to look at critically to really understand this concept you are championing, because I see behind it is your wish that housing estate grows vertically in the next near future. So can we have, I do not know what NSIMA's program is, but I see that we'll need to have more presentations from Kenneth, especially on how we can compare and see how one saves, either as a group or as an individual, by developing vertically than horizontally. But also, what are the challenges? Because you didn't mention the challenges. So why aren't people investing there? Why aren't people buying properties in some of these developments that are dotted around? For example, I am aware national housing properties in Mbarara, the uptake might have not been that encouraging. And other private developers are complaining that the uptake might not be that encouraging. Why? And yet when people build these horizontal ones, we see them going out like a snap of a finger. But apart from that, Kenneth, thank you very much. It was such a captivating discussion, and we hope you'll be coming back soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Senior Mark. Edmund, and then Nisima. Edmund first.
Yes, thank you, Engineer Kaijuka, for that elaborate presentation. My question relates to reducing costs of construction, especially for housing. Have you tried to look to do any value engineering so that the costs for construction can be reduced? For example, we see most countries outside, like Israel, use prefabs mostly, which I would think in case of the vertical construction offer good economics in managing costs. Have you looked at such good innovation so that we reduce the cost, because that is the main barrier for people acquiring and investing their monies in organized living? Thank you.
Nisima, you were asked to raise your questions again. Nisima, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, sir. My questions were two. One, how would you advise someone building the infrastructure like apartments to determine the rent? And then the second thing, I would love to do intern with National Housing, but do more of the internal operations like planning before the site. Thank you.
Okay, those ones have been picked. We have Moses Sanyu.
Yes, thank you, Chair. My name is Moses Sanyu Namanya. I'm listening in from Congo. I just had a quick one, actually. I wanted just a quick one to say thank you to Engineer Kenneth Kaijuka for the good presentation and actually for representing our cohort well, because I happen to be in the same lot as him, 1988, 1993. And but my question relies especially for some of us who are not in the country for a long time. We just come in and out, like for those ones making our living out in the diaspora. What would be the best strategy for us to invest if somebody had an interest in investing in the Uganda housing sector, like the best point of entry or the best portfolio one would invest in because sometimes you don't have much time to come in and follow up on stuff. We are in for a week and out, and then I wanted to find out from him if he has an advice on the best strategy that we can adopt or best portfolio that we can invest in the Ugandan housing sector. Thank you. Over.
Okay, I'm sure Kenneth has enough on his plate now. Kenneth, do you want to answer this, or we have another two?
Let me answer this first, Chair. So that I don't distract about Uganda Road apartments. I want to advise colleagues that when we've been running a model where when we build an estate, we sell and transfer to the owners. So normally, and I think it is related with the question down there, somebody asked, when we build and finish, what happens? Under the Condominium Act 2001, it provides that once an estate is developed, is sold, you convene a meeting of the owners, you constitute what they call a condominium board. So it becomes like an LLC of that estate because it has the numbers. So Buganda Road flats have landlords and they have a board which manages the apartments. We expect that they should be indeed maintaining their apartments. I would know that there are some of the tenants who have in many ways been aggrieved because these are apartments that were transferred at the time when they were tenants from public service or through. Some of them have not concluded their purchase processes. So, but generally for every estate that has tenancy, whether they are renting or they are owners, because it's a community, they need to manage themselves with respect to security, with respect to garbage maintenance and the other aspects. It is important that those boards become functional and they maintain those estates in the state of affairs desired. Cuthbert asked about high-end residential, no plan for workers, and the people are traveling long distances, mentioning that indeed some of them come as far as Kasokoso to work in Naria and Chiwatula and elsewhere. It is true that because housing, like I mentioned, is not facilitated, one with respect to regulation, with the policy, with the infrastructure. I mentioned that capital cost is always met by over 100%. Now, the moment, yes, you want the estate to be functional and you're going to provide, yes, a side estate which provides a workers' camp, for instance, which should be the ideal. Certainly, you are likely to be running huge costs that you'll not be able to load this cost on the buyers and therefore be able to sell all the units within the time, especially that you picked monies from the banks. I want to confirm that some developers and indeed national housing provisions of a maid's room, of a servant's room, these are aspects that we bring on board through design. And like I mentioned, we are not only looking at national housing, we are looking at the entire housing sector of Uganda. So whoever is building in Mbale, whether when they put apartments, they must have to put a workers' camp. It's a very, very good idea, Cuthbert. I will tell you where I sit in industrial area, every day the train that moves from the railway shed, you see it goes to Nambole. The biggest workforce is from Kasokoso, working, dealing with odd jobs in town, sweeping the roads, working in the markets down there in Owino and elsewhere. So it's true, the workers have demonstrated that you need a Kasokoso of sorts, but in a better organized environment. And then, like I mentioned, you can create transport for them than building another camp neighboring the estate that you've built. So it's got to be a coordinated effort from the local authorities, from the planners, that we know we have category A workforce. Where do we accommodate them? There is transport, there is access, there is security, and all these that can go with it. Nisima Berinda indeed later on asked about the opportunity how, if you're building an estate, how do you compute rent? Now, Nisima, probably I'll ask you to visit some of our professionals at National Housing, because rent is a function of many parameters. One, the location sometimes dictates rent. If you are in Nakasero, you always hear rent is about 2 million shillings for a 3-bedroom house. If it's a 2-bedroom, if it's a 1-bedroom, if it's a boys' quarter, if it's an apartment. So I think it's a whole ball game that you need to look at on how you'll compute your rent. Cost of financing, if I had my own capital, I can afford to bring down my rent so that I can have numbers in my apartments. So this is a classical discussion that can happen. You also were asking about internship opportunity. Yes, if you visit us, not necessarily in the construction side. I want to mention that for real estate to function, it does not only attract engineers and architects and land surveyors and people in that technical area. You want to understand that we hold legal chambers here, because the moment we begin to trade with titles, then there's a process of title processing and acquisition. That is a domain of the law. You have land acquisition, you have agreement, sales agreement. So we have departments for human resource. We have all the other departments that are functional within our operations. So Nisima, I would encourage you, if you visit, I think we could look at when the industrial training time comes, you could get attention. We also allow, given the caliber of professionals we have, we allow also person-to-person engagement. If you are interested in quantity surveying, we can peg you to a quantity surveyor, even if it is not the period of industrial training, so that you are able to learn and equip yourself. Somebody asked, do you allow partnerships with landlords? Yes, I mentioned this is the direction we are taking, because we've been doing land banking, and I want to raise this beyond national housing, because I'm discussing the housing sector in Uganda. But as national housing, if we are to reach the countryside, we can never do sufficient land. It has its own challenges. So what we desire going forward, and we fronted this through the collaborative framework, is that we come to Mbale, we come to Mbarara, there's a landlord who has no money to build. We work out, agree on the costs, we develop, and they get their payback. They get their worth of the land. And I mentioned we're also bringing on board those who manufacture materials, because you have a lot of paint rotting in hardware shops. You go to Katakwi, you go to any town of this country, small as it may be, you'll find materials in hardware shops. Paint has an expiry period. Steel is getting dusty and rusting on the verandas. And we've offered a gold leaf that for us to, one, be able to develop more units, we can tap into already materials that are on the market than waiting for a buyer unknown. So collaboration is there. We can collaborate with the land owners and all the other people that are ready to partner with us. How an NHCC, does NHCC work with the National Building Review Board? I'll say yes. Why yes? Because this is a National Building Review Board. They are put in place to regulate or supervise, not supervise, but to check the quality of housing that is being developed. So being developers, we are equally, we subscribe to their authority. However, the other aspect that needs to be looked at beyond the National Building Review Board is the disparity of mandates. Yes, the National Building Review Board is the Ministry of Works. You also have indeed the mandate for construction supervision in the Ministry of Works, but you have the mandate for housing under the Ministry of Lands, Housing and Urban Development. You have the Physical Infrastructure Board in the Ministry of Lands. So they need to draw synergies, but if there was any rationalization to be done, I think the Ministry of Works has demonstrated all its energies in roads and rail and transport. Then the National Building Review Board, I would agitate, should pair hands with the the Physical Infrastructure Board, not necessarily merging, but it should be brought to where the mandate 100% lies. And there are many related aspects of that nature. Our current pricing model available at NHCC, yes, I mentioned our products in NARIA. You'll have, I will share the leaflets that offer you all the products and the pricing. But in Mbarara, for instance, a 3-bedroom is a 299 million. A 2-bedroom is 199 million. And if you wanted to look at the costing, when we talk of million, it appears to be much because you want to pay it in 2-3 years. But if we're able to offer you a long-term period, then you would find that actually the facility you have acquired in the next 10 years is such a value that you could not even have acquired at 500 million. In NARIA, we have products. In Namungona, I've mentioned. So I want to invite you to look at the flyers that I will post. I will ask my teams to share on the platform so that members can pick products of their choice. But I want to add also that pricing, there is a pricing formula. The formula, like Mark asked, we'll be going into these at probably subsequent discussions. You know, it's clear, it's straight jacket. You have the cost of land, location. If it is in Nakasero, land and the cost of land will dictate a price. You are building the cost of a unit sales price. Once you have, then you have a cost for design, you have a cost for approvals by the local authorities, you load all these costs. Then you ultimately have the cost of construction, which is the materials. Then you are going to have load there the tax. For instance, if the tax currently, even if you consider only VAT at 18%, you're going to be thinking that if I was to sell a house at 100 million, 18 million of that cost is tax. It's cost of finance. If I got it at 20%, it means a house of 100 million, 20 million is cost of finance, which will go to the bank. So 20 plus 18 is already 48. So you want to say how much remains for construction of the house. If I remove a margin of 5%, working backwards, so then you realize that there is a desire to have cheap houses, what we call affordable houses, but it must be a different ball game. How can we make land available to bring down cost? How can we make cost of finance for construction come down? And this will come down through the long-term low interest capital that we talked about going forward. As national housing, we can bring our margin through economies of scale to about even 2 to 4-5%. But we want to make sure we roll out products that we meet the needs. But the cost, as long as we're still borrowing, as long as we still buy land on the commercial basis, then it is going to be an uphill task. We ask government to acquire land to make sure that housing is realized. Why has NHCC allowed NSSF to get into our mandate and when it is not their mandate? Now, I mentioned in the presentation that housing, real estate is private sector led 100%. So nobody is stopped from building. That's why you see you can wake up, plan your land and build. But we are saying that should be regulated. Now, NSSF, I don't speak for them, but you know, they have mandate to grow their depositors' money. And if they realize that one of the avenues beyond bonds, beyond lending money to government and other agencies, one of the avenues is to build houses, then certainly nobody stops them. So it's like asking why have we allowed other developers as well to come into this space? The prudent one would have been align NSSF with the funds that they have, because their competencies may not necessarily be in construction. Pick monies from NSSF, run funds, have the Housing Finance Bank manage the funds, have a national housing do the construction, and so the cycle, you make it affordable because the NSF funds are long-term and patient funds. But somebody needs to, if you are such a person on this platform that can drive that and champion that relationship, it would be extremely good. Belinda, how do you know that? I think I have answered. Somebody talked about we lose a lot of land where tombs, where the burial grounds exist, and was asking, and they are scattered all over the country. Can we have cemeteries? Now, if you remember in my first slide, I also mentioned that Part of the permanent infrastructure we've not paid attention to are tombs. For starters, we need to change our culture. I know culture is hard to change, but there are culture that is developed along the way. For instance, burying in cemented, tiled, digitized tombs is unethical, in my opinion, because wherever you put that tomb with concrete, I know I'm touching many people's nerves. You want to say, I loved my brother, I loved my family member, but look what 40 years, 50 years to come, when the 45 million Ugandans are dead, which is going to happen? You're going to have tombs everywhere. And wherever tombs are, for you to shift to them. So this needs a policy shift in terms of how this is happening. The aspect of cemeteries is good. Indians, they cremate. I saw in the UK, people will bury you vertically. One, they will know the first member of the family go 30 feet. The second member, they lift the soil. You come 28 feet. The other one comes 25. They save land. They have known how to make sure we need to save land. Otherwise, it will be finished. So I agree with you, cemeteries and the other forms that can save the land. And where tombs exist, that land's value goes down. The cost of shifting the tombs is astronomical. So I agree with you that there is a need to pay attention to this. It's not only national housing, it's a nationwide scale. If people are allowed to bury without concrete, I think that would even be smarter. You wouldn't have to worry about soil recreation. Victoria, you applauded the presentation from Area Uganda. I want to thank Area Uganda is the Association of Real Estates and Agents. And there are many drivers they are championing, for instance, the Real Estates Agents Bill before Parliament. You have brokers. It's a whole domain of real estate and housing. They are not registered. They are not defined. You cannot define the quantum of pay, but everybody wakes up and is a broker. Some of them have defrauded, they want to buy for your product, but they never get you the product and they've eaten your money. So there's a section on facilities management, which relates with maintenance. If you have an estate of that nature, for instance, we run our Crested Towers. I mean, we can't sit here and begin to run it the way we run a residential estate. So you attract facilities management professionals and they do this work. So area, I want to applaud you. They are championing a lot, and probably through this discussion, they could be given a window at some future point to elucidate on what they do. There are policy aspects, and all the professionals, you have surveyors independent, you have architects independent, and they don't have a platform where they meet. Mark, yes, you talked of the in-depth summation towards the end. Of course, I was racing with the time, but I know that the housing and real estate discussion touches everybody and it interests everybody. You needed me to critically look at those aspects of the vertical and horizontal and the numbers that I was beginning to come to. I think, yes, at subsequent discussions, I could now further present workout numbers that we could discuss. Why aren't people not interested taking the condominium units? Colleagues, friends, people, there is need for training. People will not understand a condominium establishment, and it is very simple and basic. The law allowed that if you're on top of myself, you have a title as good as somebody on ground. So each of the members of the condominium estate acquires a title which you can take to the bank recognized under the law, and you take a loan. It's as good as any other title. Why people love the horizontal growth? They have a passion and relationship with the land, because traditionally it was called land title. Now this is called a condominium title. It is a bit of education that we need to do, that you are as good, but you are, if anything, better than the one who would have his own unit house as a standalone in the vicinity. But they also think they can have opportunities for redevelopment, and that's why condominium development should look at a time horizon. If some of them become outdated, but they can't be a period less than even 50 years or so. So people look at land as if they can be able to redevelop going forward. So there are many considerations, but it's also a mindset change. People have not been told on how they can redeem land for other productive use. Edmond talked about cost of construction, whether we have considered value engineering. Like I mentioned in the price equation, technology earlier on I mentioned is one of them. Cost of finance is the other. But value engineering in terms of enhancing the product to trend with the latest technologies, how we can go small but meet the need. All these aspects on a daily, they are reviewed. But you realize that that has got to come with the availability. For instance, if you're going to look at alternative technologies, people want to knock on a wall, the mindsets are locked to brick and mortar. And so you find that alternative technologies offered probably are not yet as appetizing. But that's an area of training that we need to do to make sure that people appreciate that a worker's house, for instance, which is glass with a glass walling all over, will live as long as a mortar and brick house if it is maintained. Moses Sanyu from Congo, an old boy, want to thank you for listening in from that far. You're talking of the opportunities the diaspora can use to acquire properties. I want to say there's been a challenge on the diaspora market with respect to coordination. Our embassies are not doing as much to bring the Ugandans out in the diaspora together. We've been getting good collaboration from the UNA, the Uganda North American Association. They mobilize themselves, they bring together a critical mass of customers. Sometimes they dictate. We want to move to customizing estates for the benefit of such communities. So we want to invite you, Moses, that if you find time, one time you're in Uganda, come to us. We look at your interest, we look at the scope, and I'm sure we should be able to address your. I think, Chair, that's more or less what I had picked. I beg to submit.
Thank you, Kenneth. You've nailed it. I think the only item you didn't touch, which you will touch next time, is aren't there any offers for OBs, special ones for OBs, especially from Newhouse? But that one, you'll talk about it next time when we host you. Now, I want us to close this session, and this is how we're going to do it. There were 3 burning questions which were outstanding, but we want Abraham, I hope you're online. You're going to do your closing prayer. And but before Abraham comes in, yes, Abraham, wait, please. You wait when Abraham, wait. You're the resident pastor. You have your time. Okay. We're going to ask Ben Paul Mungereza to give closing remarks on behalf of the OBs. Our senior statistician, he posted something about statistics that the figures that Kenneth gave earlier were okay. However, the Ugandans, being Ugandans, we never refer to those figures. Ben Paul, I wish you could give us some closing remarks. Then after that, Abraham is going to give us a closing prayer. And I request that OBs remain around because we're going to go for our usual open session, including Kenneth. You'll also stay behind. And then we'll pick another 2-3 questions, which I already took note of, some right questions. Senior Ben Paul.
Thank you so much, colleagues, and good evening. Thank you for coming for this session. As observed earlier by the coordinators of this, we clocked 121. I think I've not seen this number. This is the first time I've seen such a big number. Engineer Kenneth, you've done a splendid job. You know, you through the numbers. You know, I love numbers by virtue of my profession. You were moving through the numbers, and I was following you critically. One of the points that Kenneth raised was data and statistics not being available. And I also supplemented in the chat that, well, even that one which is available is not used because people simply don't like statistics. They think that you can just pick any number. But I think the numbers Kenneth has given us in this presentation can help us to make, some informed decisions. I like the condominium law that you talked about and the condominium ownership. I like it. And I think the options you've provided to us, I request the coordinators also to bring Engineer Kenneth again, because there are some things I think where we need to touch more endpoints so that we all benefit from it. This has been a very wonderful and fruitful evening. I must say I listened to every single word that was said at this session. And I'd like to thank all of you who turned up. And next time, next Saturday, don't miss. Always be there with us. Have a pleasant evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, senior statistician, Ben Paul. I'll continue calling you a senior statistician because you taught me statistics at university. And I know at one time you also headed the Bureau of Statistics. And I know you also heading some regional something very big to do with statistics. Now, before our resident pastor comes in to give us a closing prayer, allow me give Kenneth around 2-3 minutes to wind up, just in case.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, colleagues, and for the response. We'll always remain happy to keep indeed interacting on this platform, but critically that this should not just be a discussion. We need to move it forward. Housing touches everybody, touches every family. It needs attention more than the other sectors that are being attended to. I will tell you, once you put up a house, like I mentioned, all water is consumed in a building, all energy is consumed in a building, all sewage is generated in a building, roads lead to buildings from home to work backwards. So the need to center stage housing should be a voice for all of us. Lastly, there's something you talked about, whether there would be a product, for instance, for the NSOBA group. I already called upon ourselves that we can do more than just collecting mabugo. We have statisticians like Ben and yourself and others. We have engineers and architects. National Housing is able to find an appropriate piece of land, strategic, and we can agree that we can fundraise for such a project through a worked out mechanism. I want to mention for senior colleagues on the show, we are working with Uganda Revenue Authority, Senior OB John Musinguzi and Ebo Kagumira and the team, and we are moving towards establishing what we call a URA residential hub, where all staff over 3,000 begin to look at, with their saving through their circle, will be seen to live in an organized environment, to create Luboa, create a parliamentary village. All our honorable MPs, when you meet those, you lose the aspect, but also once a honorable, you are honorable, especially those who lose from the political scene. So you need an environment where you'll forever remember. And of course, these would be customized when they are meeting their constituents. So housing must be customized to fit the need. It's not just simply building. What we are seeing, you put up your house, somebody puts up a bigger unit next, somebody puts a church, another one puts a bar, and ultimately it loses value. So we're also working with Stanbic Bank, for those of you who work with Stanbic Bank, to also make sure we put up a Stanbic Bank village for staff. So it's not hard, Chair and members, to put up an NSOBA village through a collaborative framework and pulling together resources and looking at the needs. So I want to thank you, and I want to wish you a blessed evening.
Thank you, Kenneth. Thank you, Kenneth, once again. I can't thank you anymore. Thank you, Abraham, President Pastor.
Thank you, my brother, and thank you, members, for attending today's Chiganiro. Let us pray. Father, Lord Almighty, we want to thank you so much for this evening. We thank you for bringing us together. Thank you for the hard times. Thank you for the blessings. And this kind of presentations that we have had, this series, the organizers, Lord, we pray that you bless them, that you bless NTARE School, that you bless all the plans ahead, all that we are going to share, oh Lord, that may they be of great use in our lives, that we shall always know you, that Lord, you are above everything. Provide for us, protect us, and save us, that we always know you as our Lord and Savior and Provider. Thank you for this evening. As we go deep in the night, Lord, may you protect us, see us through tomorrow, through next week, through next month, through the year. And Lord, may we always see your arm in everything, because you are our Lord, you are our Savior. Even what we have not asked for, Lord, may you provide for us. Bless our country. Bless each one of us in our families. You provide for us at every point of need, Lord. May you come and we always see you in every aspect of our life, because we pray all this through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen. May the grace of
Amen.